This video is brought to you by Manscaped.com, the global brand for men's grooming and hygiene products. Manscaped hooked me up with a bunch of stuff from their all-in-one Performance Package 4.0. First thing I'm going to highlight is the Lawnmower body trimmer. This is Manscaped's 4th generation electric waterproof trimmer with advanced skin-safe technology, which reduces those annoying and painful mistakes. This Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer has a super smart cordless charging system, and these little LED lights on the front show you how much juice you have, which is up to 90 minutes with a full charge. Also included are 2 products, the Crop Preserver, Ball Deodorant, and the Crop Reviver, Ball Toner Spray. Simply apply the Crop Preserver after your shower for all-day body odor protection, and the Crop Reviver is more of a convenience spritz, with cooling aloe vera to quickly refresh the area whenever you need it. It really works. Manscaped really has you covered from head to toe. This is their Weed Whacker nose and ear hair trimmer. It's a wireless nose trimmer with the same skin-safe technology aforementioned. For a limited time, you get all of this plus 2 free gifts, the Shed travel bag and the Manscaped anti-chafing boxer briefs. Go to manscaped.com and get 20% off, plus free international shipping, plus 2 free gifts when you use promo code nerdSlayer20. Manscaped, always use the right tools for the job. Your balls will thank you. Thank you, detectives, and thank you, Manscaped, for sponsoring this video. Greetings, detectives. It's been a minute. The survival genre, a genre we haven't spoke about yet despite the many deaths present in it, made waves in the early 2010s with the likes of Rust and the original genre pioneer itself, DayZ, and Arma 2 mod. There would be another title, another to add to the survival genre, but one that would also go on to form a genre of its own. Sony Online Entertainment, later known as Daybreak Game Company, would team up with none other than PlayerUnknown and create the world's very first official Battle Royale. SOE has claimed a few of the titles we have covered on this series already, a legendary MMO and online gaming developer/publisher, but equally famous and infamous. Still, following the early successes of DayZ and leveraging the ingenuity behind PlayerUnknown and his idea for creating a Battle Royale game, and thus the genre, Daybreak was looking to cash in themselves. This would result in the creation of Daybreak's very own 1-part survival, 1-part battle royale shooter, H1Z1, as the title would first be dubbed and launched in early access January 2015. What happened after that launch was, in short, a total roller coaster of peaks and valleys. H1Z1 was able to garner a very successful population on Steam, selling over 1 million copies, and even had its very own fully salaried esports league. And then the game fell off a cliff. And all, including the aforementioned esports league and impressive population for H1Z1, took a serious hit, and the game never recovered since. It's 2021 now, and it's been nearly completely abandoned. What went wrong with H1Z1, 1-part battle royale, 1-part survival shooter? Why was the title unable to garner a long-term sustained success despite its staggeringly high peaks? On this episode of Death of a Game, we take a look at the mysterious story of H1Z1, a title that went from being a top-ranked Twitch and Steam game that sparked many content creator careers and inspired many games, to a near completely forgotten and abandoned game. Grab your body armor, helmet, and weapon of choice, detectives, for the story behind the world's first officially launched Battle Royale's sudden failure. The story of H1Z1 begins back in 2014, following the overwhelming success of an Arma 2 mod, DayZ. DayZ brought zombies and survival elements to the shooter space, effectively creating its very own genre, the survival genre. Others would sense the success of DayZ and express interest in following their footsteps regarding a more hardcore design. The concept was simple. A survival game was about having a dangerous environment and death be a constant element. Once your character dies, you lose your stuff unless you can somehow loot it back, looting up new weapons, gear, and food/drink. Survival games might have a dangerous environment, an ever-persistent player versus environment factor, but they also had very prominent PvP aspects, hard-baked into the design. With finite loot and resources, you would inevitably tangle against other players, as well as potentially allying with some against other players. Some, like DayZ itself, would focus more on the survival elements and exploring an already fleshed-out world. Others, like early survival games like Rust, developed by Valve, would blend elements of Minecraft, allowing for buildable bases and structures. But the survival game we are covering today took another angle as well. Well, sort of. It wasn't immediately revealed, but H1Z1, SOE's own survival game, wouldn't just be a survival game. It would be creating another genre altogether. Sony Online Entertainment in 2014 wasn't quite at peak SOE anymore, with many of their successful titles having either seen their best days or were shut down and probably featured already on this series. A shell of their former selves at this point, but still one with powerful and impressive IPs nonetheless. They were still a powerful company very much interested in the online world of gaming they used to dominate. Their days of creating entirely unique AAA IPs, however, seemed to be a bit behind them, with many of their best creative talents having left already. They weren't ready to give up yet though, and were eager coming off of the failures of their EverQuest Next project to launch a modern, successful online title. Brendan Green, better known as PlayerUnknown, was fresh from making a Battle Royale modded server in DayZ, which, as we mentioned at the top, is a modded version of Arma 2. Brendan Green often is credited for being the creator of the Battle Royale genre, in gaming at least, as it existed in the Hunger Games previously, and even in an older Japanese movie dubbed literally Battle Royale. But Brian Hicks, who was a lead developer and prominent figure behind DayZ as well, was actually responsible for the Survivor Games server, which was effectively a Battle Royale server back in 2012 that PlayerUnknown took inspiration from heavily. PlayerUnknown would take these inspirations aforementioned and create his very own Battle Royale server, which attracted the attention of SOE, who were intent on working with him to realize his dreams for an actual game. SOE would bring PlayerUnknown on as a consultant, and would begin development of a survival Battle Royale of their own dubbed H1Z1, both parts survival and Battle Royale, something that hadn't been done yet. PlayerUnknown's consulted on the Battle Royale portion. SOE would immediately segment development of H1Z1 into two different projects with two different teams following Green's contract expiring. This was very likely due to the sort of opposing game designs, which one focused on survival, aka persistence, and the other more so on the Battle Royale craze we mentioned before. Still, before they were even fully fledged projects, they were already splitting off into two different projects, but still claiming to be under the same one banner ultimately. H1Z1 would be teased to the public June 9th, 2014, promising more footage and details to be revealed at E3 in a few days. It's here fans for the first time could see what was looking to be, from trailers shown, a cooperative survival zombie experience with potential for PvP, much like the game they were trying to mimic and compete against, DayZ. Engadget had a hands-on with H1Z1 at E3 2014, detailing more about the survival shooter. Much of what was present in the game thus far was par on course for the journalist who tested the game, who likened it to Rust and DayZ as examples. The similarities were quite obvious, with thirst meters, food meters, and needing to build your foundations and make your base just like in Rust. Said base could be crafted by you completely from scratch, or you could choose to take over an existing structure. Rust wasn't really a PvE game, however, not really having much in the way of early on AI threat, which is where H1Z1 would borrow more from DayZ instead. As Ross explains in the article, the lore for the game was rather bare bones, making it quite clear the game was very much a work in progress, or designed to be a bare bones sandbox experience where players would do the heavy lifting regarding story and personal narrative experiences, teaming up with other players to survive in the harsh environment against the zombies and other possible hostile players. There was still great potential in these bare bones sort of novel experiences without much story or narrative to them. In fact, the survival genre is sort of built on this idea after all. Emergent gameplay created without much need for developer intervention or interaction. But H1Z1 had promises of more than just that, with things such as vehicles, a growing non-instance world, a virus capable of spreading amongst players and infecting them, zombies never despawning, and some could even grow in power. A developer demo would showcase yet more details concerning the game, including the crafting and inventory system. Oh, for those chuckling at me mentioning an inventory system, if you play DayZ as a mod, or even possibly now, you know exactly why that's a big deal. You spend so much time in these games looting, with a poor inventory system that can create many headaches. The crafting system was rather expected from a survival game, combining components you loot or gather to create much needed gear, weapons, or items. As for the Battle Royale portion, it wouldn't feature any building or serious crafting. The point of that mode was 100 of you spawning on a map with no weapons or gear, having to loot up and then be the last one to survive. This mode was simple at the core, but incredibly addicting, offering for near infinite replayability. H1Z1 was shaping up to be a proper competitor to DayZ. For starters, it was an actual game, not a mod, and it featured an even more robust feature set, such as player housing and proper crafting. It even had more fluid combat. While DayZ and many competitors were mods or community projects, H1Z1 was set up to be a big budget release game. H1Z1 was set to launch in early access in January 2015, following a number of delays. Early access at the time was a new phenomenon, where you basically paid full price for an unfinished game with the idea or promise that eventually they're gonna finish it. The issue being in this case, well, SOE wasn't some tiny company who needed crowdfunding. They had launched already a dozen projects or something. This was clearly done deliberately because getting paid while you develop versus after is just better business. Charging a box price for an early access game is never going to be well received, and understandably, but that's not ultimately why H1Z1 would so early on come under fire from the fans. Drama would already surround the new zombie online shooter before even launching, concerning the monetization model the game would be using. Early in 2014, when asked about the monetization they would be using in H1Z1, SOE CEO Smedley stated that, "We will be selling wearables. We felt like this would be a good, fair revenue generator. We will not be selling guns, ammo, food, water, etc. That's kind of the whole game, and it would suck in our opinion if we did that. They also wouldn't allow you to spend real-life money on airdrops that would drop weapons. This was a rather fair model that didn't allow for any pay-to-win aspects, apparently. The only problem was, well, that wasn't the model that they would be using. They would allow you to actually buy airdrops with real-life money, and these airdrops would actually drop items, weapons, and ammo. This meant that Smedley and the team already had gone back on their word, pre-release merely months after saying the opposite. The community response was rather immediate, as cries of pay-to-win hit the web as soon as the game went live in early access January 15th, 2015, as reports of players being able to buy airdrops which had everything of value inside of them with real cash came out. Smedley's response to this was par for the course really for the American CEO so far. Smedley would state in a Reddit post that players ignored the game was basically always going to have airdrops and this concept present, saying that it was clearly stated on the website. Issue being that that was put up on the website the day the game went into early access, so there wasn't any warning at all. And Smedley is blatantly lying here, when we have clear evidence to state that the H1Z1 team stated previously that
there's no way you can get ammo any other way. You can't buy ammo,
right?
You can't buy guns,
right?
You can't get them out of a crate.
Right.
There's zero way. You have to find them in the world.
Ultimately, Smedley's response to the fans who were angered at this hypocrisy was simply, if you think it's pay to win, don't buy it, don't play it. Now, if hearing about SOE and Smedley's handling of all of this doesn't leave a sour taste in your mouth, I'm just convinced you don't have taste buds. H1Z1's early access launch would continue on regardless, well up until the servers were brought down due to a series of technical issues.
What the? What is that noise?
Another set of issues plaguing the launch of what was supposed to be the next biggest thing in the survival world was issues of login. Performance issues, no voice chat, and apparently low AI responsiveness were present. Smedley and team were exhausted though, and they were unable to easily remedy their litany of issues. While there's a certain level of understanding given to a newly launched product, the state that H1Z1 was at launch was more than just launch woes. Following the attempted hotfixes and patching from SOE, they would actually break the game even more, introducing yet more bugs to the game. Launch, early access excuse or not, was not going well for SOE. And what would happen just the next month would change quite a lot going forward for both H1Z1 and the future of online gaming. In a totally surprising move, John Smedley would announce on Reddit that SOE is leaving behind the Sony roots it was founded on, and being acquired by an investment firm titled Columbus Nova. SOE would now be dubbed Daybreak Games Company, effective immediately. Smedley reassured fans that all games in their portfolio would remain, and business would continue as usual. The reasons for the acquisition, according to the press release, seemed to be regarding investment needed into the company. SOE, just like that, was no more. And that meant a whole lot in a space that didn't exist without their name in the first place, really. I mean, EQ was their game, remember? SOE or Daybreak Game Company now, despite claims of business as usual, were going to look different as a company going forward, and so was online gaming over a few genres, really. While they were changing company names though, and effectively their masters, their game H1Z1 was cracking an impressive 1 million in sales despite all of the launch issues and monetization drama. 2015 would continue to be an interesting and overall rather negative year for Daybreak as a company. H1Z1 had great initial success and was still maintaining above 20,000 players peak throughout the summer. However, the significant drop in population you see in May and June of 2015 for the game can likely be attributed to a string of server downtimes brought upon the game after Daybreak CEO Smedley made it his personal goal to fight a particular cyber squad of hackers dubbed Lizard Squad. Smedley would goad the hackers, calling them out, and in return they hounded the H1Z1 servers, bringing them down numerous times due to DDoS attacks. All of this would culminate in Smedley leaving Daybreak altogether, as he would resign July 23rd, 2015. Yeah, lesson being, don't call out hackers. A few months later, and there were reports that Smedley was already out there heading up a new firm, but his time at Daybreak had come to an abrupt end. Smedley had done a lot of damage to the reputation of H1Z1, and arguably SOE as a whole, and him being so heavily associated with it made it even more problematic. His leaving of the picture was probably actually a positive, all things considered. In fact, following his departure, the population for H1Z1 actually increased, back up to 24,795 at a player peak in August of 2015. This could be completely unrelated, but it kinda makes for a funny meme. While technically speaking, H1Z1 was already two projects smashed into one, both the survival game aspect and the battle royale aspect existed in parallel within the same game. There was, however, very little crossover between these two. While H1Z1 would receive criticism for doing such, I think that criticism is more valid early on in development. By this point though, H1Z1 did have an issue of two very different games that didn't really have a whole lot of crossover. One was about creating long-term bases and teams to survive a harsh, persistent world. The other was, well, a battle royale game where it wipes after every last victor. Still, the news of Daybreak's intentions of splitting their H1Z1 game hit the web February 5th, 2016. And players weren't necessarily happy about such. There was a certain fear that splitting them would segment the development, and one would outshine the other naturally and eclipse the other. That's actually a really good idea, and isn't a bad hunch on why Daybreak ultimately did it that way, really. Daybreak would be splitting H1Z1's survival portion into H1Z1 Just Survive, and the BR portion into H1Z1 King of the Kill. This would at the very least help for clarity's sake, and the splitting of populations didn't seem to split the population much really anyway, due to them being interested in one version versus both. Here we can see that both games have their own Steam charts now. They were actually rather comparable, with Just Survive actually eclipsing King of the Kill by just 7,000 players peak. Daybreak proclaimed that they had just reached more than 2.5 million downloads of H1Z1 before the split. Quite impressive for just 1 year after early access launch. H1Z1's first producer update came February 26th, 2016. It's here you can see that Steam players complained the most about rampant bugs present in the game. Another game update came March 9th, fixing some of the more present issues in the game. It's at this point, if you were there, you probably remember a very persistent problem. But for those of us who weren't, we have to rely on a bit of clues. Digging through Steam updates, comments, and articles, what becomes apparent, for the first time really, is the issue regarding servers and players not being ping restricted to certain servers.
China number one! Yeah!
Specifically with Chinese servers. This became a giant meme amongst the community, on streams and YouTube. As the game started to explode in popularity, especially in China, it understandably attracted way more Chinese players. The issue was that the servers in Asia were very poor performing for whatever reason. This caused the players there to want to queue elsewhere, and thus they started to connect to the NA servers. This created a number of issues in both versions of the game, as players with high ping were now flooding the servers, causing more ping and latency issues. For North American players, this meant laggy adversaries and more hit detection issues, resulting in a subpar gaming experience.
What?
If Daybreak wasn't quick to remedy this issue, there could be a repeat of what has happened in many other hardcore games such as Eve, the Chinese takeover, China number one. By May, we have yet another game update, but another update causing yet more issues when added to the game. Many players would express issues logging in and downloading the update due to a blocked game file. The population during this time in both versions dropped, but Just Survive took the bulk of the punishment, losing nearly 20,000 players of its peak player count. The first combat patch to hit the game was positively received on July 6th, 2016, as it solved many of the game's current issues regarding hitboxes, the shotgun, and general weapon polish. But would follow this update up with a devastating update, nearly killing their Steam marketplace economy overnight. they removed the ability to buy or sell older H1Z1 crate items on the marketplace. The crate items themselves could still be sold, but that would effectively kill the economy because now you had to actually purchase the box no matter what, and once you opened it, you didn't retain any of the value inside. Before anyone jumps to any weird conclusions, it's actually worse for business and making money in general for them to make this change, as in now they're going to miss out on the transaction fees. Which tells us that this was most likely a decision from an external power influencing H1Z1's design. My hunch is that they didn't want to get involved in a legal battle there, or have to deal with possible litigation or rules. Whatever the reasons were, this update was very negatively received by the community. This meant that H1Z1 was the only survival title that didn't have purchased or tradable skins on a marketplace. Rust initially had such, and DayZ eventually would have such as well. H1Z1s would have a series of updates in July through August. Each of these updates were received rather positively, but there were still large complaints of the game's poor optimization, lagging on some of even the best machines, and the weekly downtime that seemed to happen as many as 2 times a week without an update even scheduled. I don't think I've ever covered a game that had more server downtime than H1Z1, and I find it impossible to not attribute it to why the game ultimately suffered from a loss of players. The population overall for both versions of the game had dropped slightly overall, not being quite the same impressive initial numbers, but there was still quite enough players there to salvage. On September 20th, 2016, Daybreak would notify the public that they would be scrapping their console versions, the Xbox One and the PS4 versions, to focus on their PC version. This would end up being a rather risky move, especially considering how big other survival shooters and battle royales got on consoles. But as producer Chris Wynn stated, the studio was simply spread too thin to work on PC and console versions at the same time, which you can't fault them for ultimately, even if it did limit the growth potentially of their game. H1Z1 would receive its largest update yet, September 20th, 2016. The update was largely a quality of life update besides the new map and newly updated UI. While Just Survive was hobbling at a 4,000 player peak, the BR version had a resurgence following their launch, reaching 24,677 players. It wouldn't be a major H1Z1 update though if a new slew of issues weren't added on top of an already long-standing and existing issue list. September 23rd, 2016, we saw more of the same for players, as the servers were hit with more serious downtime. It was like each time Daybreak had a positive update, they also took an eternity to actually bring the update to the servers, and were then raked over the coals for it. By the end of 2016, it was clear with another update for H1Z1 that there were still many bugs and issues present in the game. But H1Z1 was going to try to keep reaching for more, through creating and adding more content to the game, advertising and etc., over-polishing what they had to a fine smoothness first. This could result in more players in the short term, but it would then be a race of trying to fix your previous issues and the new issues brought on by the new content that you're continuously adding to the game to stay competitive. Sure, maybe you get the results out of the product, but how long can it last? The golden age of H1Z1, King of the Kill, was January 24th, 2017. This update added game leaderboards, but primarily focused on doing just what I previously said Daybreak as a team hadn't done previously before: polishing. Pre-Season 3 H1Z1 King of the Kill was the best version of the game because it was the most confident version of the game. It's the version of the game that the developers stuck to their guns on the design with, and the players supported them. The core design's good, and there's no extra fluff. It's just solid arcade BR shootery. H1Z1 King of the Kill was an arena shooter BR or arcade shooter BR, with crisp movement and precise aiming. Much like Halo was to the shooter scene, it was a breath of fresh air really, with things like bullet drop, armor, helmets, limited ammo, and weapons to add to the uniqueness, all the while maintaining the movement that you would expect from an arcade shooter rather than a realistic one like DayZ. This was one of the few and rare times the community and the developers had been in agreement. H1Z1 King of the Kill would change its name yet again, this time rebranding to just simply H1Z1, while the survival version would be called Just Survive. Speaking of Just Survive, at this point in 2017 the population is up and down but never eclipses its launch numbers. It very clearly wasn't the popular version anymore. Back to H1Z1, coming with rebranding was also the announcement of a major tournament aired on the CW network with a prize pool of $300,000. They wouldn't just be showcasing one tournament either. It was a docuseries dubbed Fight for the Crown that would follow the Echo Fox Pro players in H1Z1, a team purchased by Rick Fox back in December of 2015. The tournament would also be hosted and ran by Daybreak in partnership with Twin Galaxies, recently acquired and owned by Monolith founder and YouTube WoW video star Jace Hall. Peak population for H1Z1 had soared up to 97,404 players peak, incredibly impressive and topping the very Steam most played charts even. That didn't mean that there weren't issues still present, but compared to launch and other points of the game, there were just far less of them. The biggest issues we have already covered, and unfortunately Daybreak had little solutions for those, as the Chinese players were still playing on NA servers. In fact, in a hilariously insulting post they were super aware of such February 23rd, 2017, when their solution was basically, hey guys, can you play on the right server? Thanks. Noted, and probably ignored. It wasn't just a matter of more eyes seeing H1Z1 and seeing it played on TV that was getting new players involved into the game. H1Z1 also blew up on Twitch streaming, giving birth to many of the biggest stars still in today's streaming world, Dr. Disrespect and Lyric, and also featured many of the popular streamers such as Tim the Tatman, Ninja, and Summit. Daybreak had a quality game in their hands now, and was adding even more in ways of a wanted spectator mode, hit registration fixes, and shotgun balancing. This would result in H1Z1 peaking at its all-time high impressive population of 150,179 players in the month of July 2017. This is one of the highest peak numbers we have ever covered on this series. Even if H1Z1 couldn't maintain it for very long, it's still pretty impressive. H1Z1's momentum would take a hit going into August of 2017 though, when a scheduled update would cause yet more significant downtime for the game, as well as yet again not properly install for some players, causing issues and not allowing them to play period. Daybreak would follow this update up with an introduction of a never asked for new weapon, an SMG dubbed the Hellfire 4.6. The new SMG effectively made rushing far more meta as it was able to kill targets at staggeringly fast rates. Why they added this? Who knows really, but adding a new gun wasn't needed competitively, and it wasn't really being asked for casually either. From this point on, H1Z1's population starts to take serious hits, and there's a number of reasons we have already covered for this, as well as a big reason we will be discussing shortly. But switching back to Just Survive for a moment, that version of H1Z1 would receive a much wanted and needed game update. The update, however, wasn't adding content as much as it was removing it. Daybreak would be removing the ability to do player housing in Just Survive. Now you needed to build or defend specific points called strongholds. According to Just Survive's creative director Ben Jones, the reasoning was because previously the map would just be littered with hundreds of player-made homes, which could lead to performance problems on busy servers. I have to admit, this sounds like pretty lazy development to me, because although I can't deny the previous method of building structures definitely would tax the server more, why not just develop a system to get rid of abandoned structures? Rust already had a TC or tool chest system like this, where you had to fill it with resources to keep your structure from deteriorating, so you couldn't just AFK. Just Survive's population would take a big hit, dropping down by September 2017 to 3,481 players peak. H1Z1 would keep touching combat, despite people warning them not to. August 29, 2017 with another combat update updating the spray patterns for a number of their weapons. A good analogy that content creator made regarding this is how crazy this would be to do, say for example, during a competitive season of Counter-Strike. Imagine if Valve changed the spray patterns on a gun 3 or 4 times. There would be an insane, crazy outcry and people would mass quit the game. Instead of changing a core game mechanic like a spray pattern, Daybreak would have been better off tweaking things like better recoil control. Changing things like spray patterns and movement were going to fundamentally change the game in a way that potentially the core fanbase wasn't going to enjoy anymore. The community responded very negatively to the changes, and the peak population numbers dropped down to 105,000 and 111 players peak. The combat update of August 2017 for many players caused the most damage to the game. Well, probably up until September's update came, which was an even bigger slap in the face to the loyal fanbase of H1Z1. Not so quietly, back in March of 2017, PlayerUnknown had teamed up with Bluehole Studio to make his very own BR titled PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. The success was immediately a rocket, and the game would make 11 million in just 3 days. PUBG would eventually, by September of 2017, be projected to increase its publisher's company value by $4.6 billion and generate more than $712 million of sales that year after selling more than 30 million copies. Needless to say, it was impossible for H1Z1 to not feel PUBG's success, as it completely and utterly dwarfed H1Z1's, and anything it was ever capable at even its height. But H1Z1 didn't need to beat PUBG. If anything, PUBG expanded the market even greater, just like Fortnite did. H1Z1 had a healthy niche it could potentially operate in, the more arcade shooter niche, as it still offered far more of an arcade shooter type perspective than any of the aforementioned titles. But Daybreak took the bait. Like most investment-ran companies really, they saw an opportunity to copy a successful design in an attempt to save their now dwindling game and take some of the newly created market share revenue. September 1st for H1Z1 would be the pubification of the game, changing even more huge core aspects of the game, such as movement. The apparent goal was to put more emphasis on fighting and power progression versus tedious looting. Why that had anything to do with the movement exactly, I'm not really sure. Daybreak would have enough awareness to state that it was indeed a risk what they were trying to do, push the game towards more of an aggressive, action-packed experience with less tedious looting, as they put it. It was a risk them doing that, but they believed it was the best way forward for their game. The population would yet again drop, a similarly devastating amount of 40,000 players, with peak player counts now at 63,253 players. What major success Daybreak had was slipping through their fingertips. Most players posting on the updates that came October 2017 were all echoing the same sentiments. Copy-pastas regarding a desire for the game to return to a prior form, the pre-Season 3 Golden Age form, instead of trying to poorly imitate PUBG. H1Z1's population might have been faltering, but it's almost like they weren't really completely bothered by it. On October 11, 2017, Daybreak would announce the launching of their very own professional league for the game. The league would have 15 teams with no buy-ins required for any of the teams. Each player would be paid a minimum salary of $50,000 with a 10-week competitive split. Introducing details about the league itself was none other than Jace Hall of Twin Galaxies, who would be serving as the co-chairman for the league. We've invested heavily in this. We believe the audience is ready. We know the players are ready. The game is ready. We're ready to do this. H1Z1 is a fun game, and whether it's early access title or not, those are things we'll deal with independently. While I'm sure pros and hopeful pros of H1Z1 were excited about the news, I have experience with such things. I don't believe you should artificially create an esports scene. I saw Guild Wars try to do that firsthand as a pro player in that game, and it didn't work. You need a certain level of organization, leagues, teams, etc. for a proper esports league and competition. But in the case of H1Z1 at this point, how are they even going to pay for this? Most leagues are funded by sponsors, and how are they even going to convince any sponsors when the game's population was public and was clearly taking serious hits month by month? H1Z1 would have a very successful event at TwitchCon dubbed the H1Z1 Invitational, averaging 51,000 viewers and peaking at 173,000. Successful event or not, the whole creation of a pro league seemed a bit too late to properly capitalize on the success of H1Z1. By the end of 2017, the game's population had dropped back down to 2,231 peak players, numbers that they had back at launch. It's clear in hindsight, with testimony from those involved with the Pro League, that it was a gamble. If it worked and attracted the right attention, like the CW TV series did, it could inject much needed players back into the game and get H1Z1 partnered with the right sponsors. The only problem is, it wasn't the same H1Z1 anymore. And the marketplace wasn't the same anymore. There was far more competition. It only took them nearly 3 years, but Daybreak, recognizing the success of their product in China, finally, would team up with mega Chinese game publisher Tencent to bring H1Z1 to China. This was unfortunately a bit too late, as PUBG had just officially launched in December of 2017, at the same time of the announcement, and they had the advantage of being from an Asian company in the Asian market. PUBG would end up accumulating a monster 1 billion overall downloads and gross $4.3 billion in revenue. It's impossible to say a large portion of the success didn't come from China itself, when China was its biggest market, which really makes H1Z1 being so unable to capitalize on their early success in China, with Chinese gamers, that much more painful. In the end, there never was a push for H1Z1 into China. I genuinely have no idea why there was never even a follow-up announcement or article about it. H1Z1 would finally leave early access 3 years after it first entered, February 28th, 2018. To accompany the official launch, Daybreak would include a new game mode altogether, dubbed Auto Royale. It would be exclusively played in a vehicle and added as an additional mode to the base game. Auto Royale was actually rather positively received, as it offered a much needed change of scenery to a game in a fun and casual team-based way. Within a few weeks, H1Z1 would be shedding its $20 box price that was only apparently for the early access, as the game was intended on always being free-to-play. Free-to-play would go March 8th, 2018, before launching its first official ranked season, March 14th, 2018. This would result in the population going up from a very low peak player amount of 14,518 players to a far more impressive amount of 41,891 players. But the player count would quickly drop back down in under a month to just 14,339 players. While H1Z1 was faltering in the light of the sun, the company behind the game, Daybreak Games, was under heavy fire as well. The company had ties to Columbus Nova. The company who originally purchased them apparently was owned and operated by a Russian oligarch, who had just been sanctioned by the US Treasury Department, frozen assets and all. What was most bizarre, despite all of this having something to do with Michael Cohen, Trump's former lawyer, which is bizarre in its own right, was Daybreak denying any involvement with Columbus Nova at all. The reason that this is such a crazy situation is because, well, even in their press release announcing the acquisition of the company, they mentioned Columbus Nova by name. H1Z1 would be announced on PS4 again in April of 2018, with a launch set to be the following month. This launch would also end up being delayed, and instead an open beta would take place June 2018, reaching over 10 million players. Despite projected possible successes from PS4, this wasn't enough to stave off the layoffs that hit the company April 26, 2018, where as many as 79 workers were laid off at the San Diego headquarters. Even if your team is likely in the hundreds, at the scale of a company like Daybreak, losing 79 of your workers can't be hand-waved as anything more than trimming the fat to keep investors and the board happy and your product lean, as it's kind of faltering. Daybreak, though, potentially took out a fifth of its workforce in a single layoff spree. At this point, nobody watching is surprised of the shocker that hit the web September 6, 2018, but fans of H1Z1 were certainly shocked as news hit the web that NantWorks, an investment company, had taken a controlling interest in Daybreak. NantWorks would form a new joint venture with Daybreak dubbed NantG Mobile and co-develop the game. NantWorks was founded by a billionaire Chinese South African who was also a very well-known surgeon in America. Like, the story seems straight out of a video game. But nope, just a real-life story about a video game. Patrick Soon-Shiong's plan with the acquisition of Daybreak Games was to leverage their game H1Z1 in his newly built 100,000 square foot facility adjacent to the LA Times Center headquarters. The idea was, imagine if you took this game, which has reached this level of popularity with millennials, and then integrate it with a large amount of technology that we have built. They wouldn't just play and develop H1Z1 events in their giant facility either. They would be simultaneously creating a digital production studio with their own fiber optic network, Nant Studios and Nant Mobile, as previously mentioned. It's in this article for the first time we see the mention of the exact development team size for Daybreak. By September of 2018, Daybreak still had an impressive 300 workers at their HQ. Coming as not much of a surprise to fans of the time, even Just Survive fans to an extent, was news in August of 2018 that Daybreak would be shutting Just Survive down. With the peak population at a low of 1,036 players, Daybreak didn't see enough of a financial reason to stick out the continued development of the game and would be shutting it down in October. While I would usually give a company like Daybreak the benefit of the doubt and recognize the giant elephant in the room, which is that Just Survive might have started as the core idea for H1Z1 and was even the more popular mode initially, but if you're wondering why I've been barely talking about that version in this video, it's because, well, there's not really that much to talk about. All of the updates of Just Survive were scrubbed. You can't even see or track any of the changes anymore, really. It really did feel like Daybreak, after sniffing and tasting some of the success of their BR, moved on from Just Survive. The worst part is, Just Survive actually had a loyal fan base that, even after having not much development focus, stuck around and still played the game. Daybreak effectively not only abandoned this audience in the end, they strung them on for years at this point. Just Survive was the part that tried to actually compete with DayZ, and needless to say, it never got even close. Straight out of the Death of a Game playbook, H1Z1, likely in a bit of a last-ditch effort to grab some of the success of the console market, like Fortnite and PUBG were sharing in, would launch on PS4 August 7th, 2018, and introduce new weapons, a new vehicle, and more. But although H1Z1 celebrated early success in open beta on PS4, when the game launched it wasn't making any waves. Perhaps if H1Z1 originally launched on consoles, like promised, there would have been a better reception. But in August of 2018, people weren't really looking for it anymore. This might seem like, well, they were just doing that to cash out anyway, so it's not like some big failure, right? Well, actually, Daybreak had nearly their entire team working on the PS4 version. A version, as said in the release article, made uniquely for the PS4, so it wasn't a port. H1Z1 had to work on PS4 for Daybreak and NantG Mobile now, otherwise they were out all that time and money without a whole lot to show for it. Especially on the PC platform they sort of abandoned. Remember Jace Hall? Yep, that Jace Hall. Well, more accurately, a longtime developer and a original founder of Monolith, memes aside. Jace Hall was the chairman of H1Z1 Pro League, as he was the CEO of the company Twin Galaxies, who was responsible for hosting the tournaments. August 9, 2018, NantG and Daybreak saw fit to promote him to lead the entire project, and Jace was wasting no time doing such. Immediately he made waves when he proclaimed that if the community wanted something, they would simply get it. Something that kinda sounds great in practice, but becomes a never able to satisfy expectation. And at the end of the day, you know your game design. Picking what the audience wants is kind of what got H1Z1 into this mess in the first place. Jace would also espouse that H1Z1 could be something like Counter-Strike, of the Battle Royale genre. How is it really like Counter-Strike really at all? You can change perspective, you loot up, and there's way more movement involved in the game. It's an arcade game, not Counter-Strike. This misunderstanding of the product could just be from Jace, but I'm convinced it was the entire team behind H1Z1 to a certain extent. Did they think making H1Z1 more like CS was the play after all? Big promises were being made, but how could H1Z1 possibly recover at this point, with all of its previous bad publicity and loss of players? The H1Z1 Pro League, the league and effort Daybreak, NantG, and Jace Hall all gambled on, as reported by ESPN themselves, would close November 16th, 2018, shuttered over payment issues. Allegedly, Daybreak was supposed to pay each team $400,000 per year, adding up to $6 million across 15 teams. The payment was scheduled to be made July 28th, but no payment was made. Some bigger esports teams continued to pay their players anyway, like TSM, Cloud9, CLG, and more, while others were unable to pay their players, forcing some of the teams to even just withdraw from the league altogether. Despite that payment deadline and more being missed, Jace Hall maintained that the payments would be made eventually, and they were still working to resolve the matter. But this was completely doubtful, because as we postulated earlier in the video, how are they even going to raise the money in the first place? How are they going to be able to sustain paying teams $400,000 a year when their population in November was 8,534 players peak, and their average viewer count for the year for the Pro League tournament was only 7,052 players? Well, they clearly weren't, and that was tragic because people were going to lose their jobs over it, careers, and even homes. The viewer count not being so impressive can be explained in a very simple but hilariously sad way. Facebook streaming. Yes, Facebook streaming. The Pro League had an exclusive deal to stream only on Facebook, so that player count was actually impressive back in Facebook live streams in 2018, but not at all impressive for a league of the scale and size of H1Z1 Pro League. Speaking of scale and size, the budget for the Pro League was allegedly $27 million. After the collapse of the Pro League, details came out concerning the league, why it failed, the budget issues, and Jace Hall as the frontman for all of it. Twin Galaxies and their investment company, Vision Esports, teamed up with Daybreak to put together a pro league for H1Z1 originally. Twin Galaxies then got an exclusive streaming deal on Facebook. Daybreak and Twin Galaxies then secured a $27 million investment for the league, but Hall refused to ever show the financial documents. Simply speaking, players were wondering how on earth they even funded the first season in the first place, let alone even created and funded the league. Hall would allegedly spend $2.5 million on guest appearances for content creators in an effort to drive players and viewers to their game. Shroud, Summit, and even an actress, Michelle Rodriguez, all made paid streaming appearances. Alright, Michelle Rodriguez is a gorgeous Latina actress and all, but what on earth does she have to do with H1Z1? And for $254,000? Alongside these influencers and actresses were parties with open bars, rented rooms, and more, costing as much as $7,000 a night. With rampant and ineffective and inefficient spending, the H1Z1 Pro League was entirely reliant on smashing it out of the park and then some to create the next level of success for the game. There was so much riding on all of it. But when Jace Hall decided to stream the league exclusively with Facebook, most of the community was completely perplexed as YouTube and Twitch dominated the streaming space. According to a former employee at Twin Galaxies though, this could possibly elucidate why they used Facebook. Facebook, they admitted, were shady, but allowed them to boost with a $200,000 advertising credit. Boosting their advertising on Facebook was allowing them to inflate viewership numbers in a way to make them look more favorable with better viewership. The only reason they couldn't keep doing this in the end was Facebook uncovered the link between Daybreak and those aforementioned Russian oligarchs. According to multiple sources though, many of the streaming viewership statistics giving to them were just straight lies. Speaking of lies, there were even more of them, and one of them placed visibly in hindsight. Each of the Pro League matches took place at Las Vegas at an event center, meant to drive more revenue, sort of like a sporting event. Twin Galaxies was having difficulties filling the seats though, and started giving away drink tickets, basically guaranteeing you some free drinks. But they wouldn't stop there. Twin Galaxies and Daybreak actually contacted a nearby staffing agency to pay them to be audience members. I don't know why. Maybe because I used to work for a staffing agency, but the idea of staffers being paid to care about H1Z1 esports is just hilarious. On top of the straight lies, extravagant over-the-top parties, and more, were reports of Jace Hall himself being abusive and difficult to work with. One former employee described him as narcissistic, abusive, and devoid of any work ethic. Another said that he shifted blame from himself to others so much so that one night he fired his whole staff. The H1Z1 Pro League was a total shit show, one that Jace Hall was front and center of, no matter how much blame was shifted. People lost their jobs, homes, and all of it was built on false promises and over-exaggerated claims of success or possible successes. The thing about H1Z1 Pro League is that it very clearly was an example of a forced esports league. There wasn't enough organic growth there with the player base to do it, so they had to force things, lie and inflate their viewer counts to stay afloat. They should caution even big companies on doing such things in the future, especially when esports doesn't really make money yet. Most of the largest esports companies lose money all the time on esports. Hell, Riot has admitted before that esports doesn't even make them money. What it does give them is exposure to sell skins, but that's a long-term investment and a long-term gain. You have to survive long enough to get there. But trying to skip to the end and just become a professional league when you're clearly not able to based on your game's interest and player base alone was always destined for failure, especially when it wasn't just a risk, it was betting the house on a color you have just decided to wake up and wear that day. There wasn't ever a need for things to be so risky. But Jace Hall and those involved in H1Z1 wanted to become the next Halo esport, or more. All we got in the end though was a litany of lies and manipulation. And worst of all, a massive fumble and damaging affair for H1Z1 as a whole. Jace Hall would respond to the allegations, admitting to some, ignoring some, and outright denying some. Jace didn't deny the spending on content creators and influencers though, but rejected the extravagant framing. Hall stated that they were in the marketing budget. Regarding the payment fiasco with the Pro League, Jace Hall said that they were still within the window to pay that year, but I'm just gonna call bullshit on that. Yeah, maybe if you guys could have paid it back, you're within the window. But clearly you can't make the payment, and so you're gonna put it off as long as possible. It's not a proper league or support system if you suddenly stop paying your teams though. Imagine if a professional sports league did that. Most bizarrely was Jace's response to the claims of harassment or abuse, which basically amounted to people are mad 'cause bad, which literally makes the guy sound like a comic book or anime character, or maybe the character that he portrays in his WoW video. If any, they make many of the not addressed claims and not properly denied claims seem all that much realer. Jace Hall might have brought some buzz and popularity to H1Z1, but overall caused far more damage to the Battle Royale. Following the collapse of their pro league, Daybreak would be met with more layoffs, December 7th, 2018, when 70 employees lost their jobs this time. The population also would shrink down to 4,010 players peak. Through multiple launches, early access, and multiple name changes, H1Z1 would look to shed its tag yet again. At this point, it can't not look like a move to avoid the negative connotation with the name, right? H1Z1 would be rebranded as Z1 Battle Royale now. With the name change actually came quite a surprising and wanted update, at least like 3 years ago. Accompanying the name change was an update that would bring the now dubbed Z1 Battle Royale back to its previous pre-season 3 state. The state many fans had been asking for a return to now for 3 years. NantG was trying to bring back the game to its roots and restore an arcade feel. There were some new bells and whistles there too, such as the mission system allowing for more unlocks. The population would be jolted back into the living, jumping back up to 12,731 players peak following the update. But how long could they maintain the audience would be another question altogether, and a difficult one to ask in March of 2019. Finally dealing with one of the biggest issues at the head of the company, Jace Hall would step down from his leadership role in Z1 Battle Royale and stop consulting on the project altogether. Jace Hall's exit is as dubious as his entrance in many ways. Suddenly he's there, and then suddenly he's gone. Within a month, the success brought by the reversion to the pre-season 3 state was basically gone. Population was back down to 4,694, and NantG was throwing in the towel. NantG expressed challenges precluding them from having long-term successes, including largely the confusion over them and Daybreak sharing the game development of Z1 itself. Which just kind of sounds odd, right? Because at the end of the day, Daybreak were the original devs. If NantG was going to acquire the company and take it over, it seemed weird that they created their own company and then started to work in parallel. NantG would go back to focusing on their core mission of mobile games and hand over Z1 back to Daybreak Games. Somehow, like a zombie featured in the game, Z1 kept clawing back to life. Was there a path ahead for Daybreak now, though, after reassuming control in the summer of 2019? As we mentioned previously due to the clues, but now with actual confirmation, the PS4 development of H1Z1 had taken the majority of the company's focus. Daybreak now had to completely refocus the team on PC, but unfortunately the writing was already on the wall for the title. As by July of 2019, the peak population for Z1 Battle Royale had dropped to 1,018, an all-time low. Daybreak would be hit with yet more layoffs in October of 2019, this time for an undisclosed amount of employees. The rest of 2020 would be rather quiet. A little thing called the pandemic certainly contributed, but Z1 Battle Royale straight up had no updates after October 21st, 2020. Well, unless you count the Season 6 kickoff and server update that happened November 7th, 2019. Which always helps in bringing back players, and that it did when the population would jump back up to 2,028 players peak, up double from the month before. But every time some level of success would hit Daybreak and Z1 Battle Royale, something else more damaging or worrying would happen or transpire and sort of backstep all of that progress. Well, they were due for a new one. And that came in the form of Daybreak itself being bought by a Swedish games company dubbed Enad Global 7 for $300 million. That meant that alongside with their other stable of IPs, Z1 Battle Royale was now an Enad Global product too. Z1 Battle Royale following the acquisition, though, was like the last kid getting picked on a team during field sports. There's no mention of them in the press release that detailed all kinds of financial information. Literally at all. No mention. It's like they didn't even want Z1 on the team anymore. This was a very damning blow to Z1 Battle Royale, and its longevity as a product, because if the people that recently just bought you don't care about you, it means that they probably don't see you worth their time to make money with. The player base understandably following the sale drops down to an incredibly low 412 peak players, 364 times less players than they had at their peak for reference, by the way. Matters looked worse when Daybreak effectively ghosted their next competitive ranked season, December 2020. The season ended with no mention of a new season, and no mention since. At this point, like the article states though, lobbies were as small as 25 players. Nobody was really playing the game anymore. Z1 Royale seemed completely abandoned by March 2021. 6 years of live service later, if Z1 Battle Royale isn't coming to an end soon, it would only continue to barely hobble on until not even a single match could be played out. By August of 2021, the game barely had 244 peak players and 114 on average. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Jace Hall and former lead vet Anthony Castoro from H1Z1 would form a company to work on a genre-defining metaverse project, which just goes to show you can basically fumble an entire video game project live in front of everybody, publicly, and still get employed. Hooray! The last thing we've heard about H1Z1, Z1, or whatever name you prefer to call it at this point, was just recently in August of 2021, when Dr. Disrespect, who's in the process of building his own video game studio to either develop his own project or work with another developer to develop a game, expressed interest in creating a sequel to H1Z1. And what else comes to mind than H1Z1, which gave him the gasoline needed to ignite his entire career? Doc's the kind of person who could or would actually attempt such a thing, and with former developers contacting him and letting him know they would do an H1Z1 too, there's still a sliver of hope left for fans of arcadey BRs, without all the building stuff. Z1 Battle Royale as of September 2021 is still existing, but in no better shape than we have mentioned previously. Whether or not Enad Global decides to take the game out to the back woodshed or not, H1Z1's time in the sun has surely gone and passed. So let's waste no more time, detectives. In case you weren't paying enough attention, our deduction sequence is coming soon and is designed to catch everyone up on the clues and evidence obtained thus far. Tom, start the music. A buggy and poorly optimized title since early access launch. Rampant server downtime accompanying every update and maintenance. H1Z1 changed core design way too many times and had a constant crisis of identity, having 2 games within one. Jace Hall was a massive risk who took massive risks, and they didn't pay off. Esports for H1Z1 was a massive and expensive endeavor that didn't really pay off. Loss of trust and respect with their audience. Competition like PUBG especially put a serious hurt on H1Z1's chances. Well, detectives, we've reached the end of this video. What a case, right? Well, nonetheless, a case we can surely put to bed now. H1Z1's story of success, failure, and everything else in between is one that more developers should study. It's not some obscure title that struggled to figure things out, or a title that never had its day in the sun. No, H1Z1 was at one point on top of the world, and then they weren't. But as much as you can blame the failure of the game on just better competition, H1Z1's problem was ultimately another tale of a video game that, after having success as being itself, decided to just switch designs into being an inferior version of another game. They weren't the first to do it, and they won't be the last. The allure of a bigger pie is, simply speaking, too alluring for some, especially an investment company. Thanks for watching, detectives.
We're too late. This entire city must be purged.